Hello everyone and welcome. As was mentioned, my name is Dale Bellaire and I'm a Métis student, a PhD student in our Faculty of Health here at the University of Waterloo. I'm honored today to be here to introduce our speaker, Mary Spencer. Mary is a member of the Chippewas of Nawash First Nation and former WBA super welterweight world champion. Wow, say that 3 times fast. She grew up in Windsor, Ontario and started boxing at the age of 17 at the Windsor Amateur Boxing Club. Mary went on to spend 10 years on the Canadian boxing team where she won 3 world titles as well as the Pan Am Games, and in 2012 she became the first female athlete and first Indigenous woman to represent Canada in the Olympic Games in boxing. In addition to being one of Canada's premier boxing champions, Mary is also known for her advocacy work supporting Indigenous youth. She's been involved in Motivate Canada's Gen 7 Aboriginal Role Model Initiative, developing sport, physical activity, and empowerment programming for First Nations communities in Ontario. In 2013, Mary also became one of 6 elite athlete mentors with the CIBC Team Next program. This program provides funding and mentorship to young athletes who hope to represent Canada on the world stage. The following year, she received an Inspire Award for her accomplishments in sports and her work in the Indigenous community. In 2019, she received the Randy Starkman Award from the Canadian Olympic Committee, given to a national team athlete who uses sporting excellence for the benefit of a community. Please join me in welcoming Mary to the stage so we can all hear about her incredible journey.
Thank you, Dale. That was such a good intro. I really don't have much to add to that. No, I'm just kidding. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. One of my favorite things to do is to talk about boxing, and I'll be doing that today. And also speaking a lot about other sport and participation in sport. I was born in Wyerton, Ontario. It's a small town outside of my First Nation. And as an infant, my family relocated to Kitchener-Mekusib and Niniwug, also known as Big Trout Lake. It's a fly-in community in northern Ontario. And we lived there for a year before moving back down south, and I grew up in Windsor, Ontario. I had plenty of access to sport my entire life. I tried everything. I started off as a figure skater. It's a long way to come, figure skating to boxing, but I tried that. I did a little bit of baseball, soccer, volleyball, and my favorite for a very long time, Dale, you might like this, was basketball. I loved basketball for a very long time in my youth, and I had access to coaches, gyms, teams, house leagues, games, all kinds of ways to participate in sport. I had gym class even. We might not think that's a big deal, but I'll share with you later. It is a big deal. But I had all kinds of access to sport, and I used it for a number of different things. I needed to get energy out as a young kid. My parents could see that I was always restless if I wasn't doing sports. They put me into sports. It helped me concentrate. I did better in school because of sports. I made friends and had social activity because of sport. When I was 16, I started getting into trouble in school, and sport played a different role for me at this point in my life. I got kicked out of high school, actually, for getting into a fight. And a few days later, I found myself in the Border City Boxing Club in Windsor, Ontario. And I met a coach there who wanted to know why I was at the gym during school hours. 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And he's like, why are you here and not in school? And I said, I was kind of shy to tell him, I'm like, I got kicked out of school. And I wasn't sure he was going to take it because most of the sports I had played growing up, it was, part of the deal was that you go to class, you do well, and you don't get kicked out of school, and you can play the sport after. So I was kind of shy to say I got kicked out of school, and I didn't know if that was going to affect my chances to be able to train at the gym, but I didn't understand boxing at that time. It was just fine. And then he said, okay, well, what did you get in trouble for? And then I was very shy to tell him why I got in trouble. I'm like, why is this coach going to want to train someone who's fighting? I'm sure that's one of the rules for being here. So I sheepishly said I got kicked out of school for fighting. And he had a little grin. I saw it. He definitely had a little grin. And he said, okay, fighting. How big was the girl that you fought? That's a valid question from boxing coach, right? How big was the girl that you fought? And I said, I didn't fight a girl. I fight a guy who was about, a little bit taller than me, a few inches taller than me. And his face changed. This was a coach by the name of Brad Jeffries. His face changed, and he grabbed his cell phone, and he made a call to another coach at another gym in Windsor, a coach that I had heard about by the name of Charlie Stewart, who was an Olympic coach. Everyone in my town had heard of this man. He was famous. And he called him up and he said, there's a girl here. She's 17. She just got kicked out of school for fighting a dude. And I didn't hear what was said on the other end, of course. But next thing you know, he asked me to pack my bag. We're going to head over to the other gym and meet Charlie Stewart. And I didn't really understand what was going on. I just came there to work out, and so I packed my stuff up, and we went across town to meet this boxing coach named Charlie Stewart. And I thought that we were going to walk into, maybe a training session or something like that. Maybe it was going to be a full gym and people boxing, and we were going to just kind of join in and meet this man. But the gym was completely empty. And then I started getting nervous, like, what are we doing here? And Charlie was there. He was waiting for us. He's like, all right, so you're married. Get the gloves on then. Let me see what you got. I did not sign up for this. I had no idea what he was talking about. Like, what do I have? Like, I have no idea how to box. But I got into the ring with this coach. I had my gloves on, and I started firing off some shots. And I'm trying to impress him just because of who he is, and I thought it would be great if he decided to train me. I have no idea why he would, but I wanted to impress him, so I started, throwing punches quickly and bringing them back up to my face, and he didn't look very impressed, and I wasn't surprised. And then I started sitting down on my shots and throwing them as hard as I could, and he still didn't look impressed. And then he's like, all right, that's enough. He's kind of scary. He's like, okay, that's enough. So I took the gloves off, and he said, where do you live? And I almost gave him somebody else's address. Like, I don't think I want to tell this man. I just wasted his time. I don't think I want to tell him where I live. But I told him, I'm like, this is where I live, okay? And he's like, all right, I'm going to pick you up tomorrow morning at 5:30, and don't be late. Don't make me honk in your neighborhood. Be ready when I pull up. I was 17 years old, and I didn't wake up at 5:30. I maybe stayed up till 5:30, but I certainly never woke up at 5:30. So I think I slept with one eye open all night, thinking I was going to definitely miss this opportunity at 5:30. But I was ready to go. I was up and ready to go. Charlie pulled up, picked me up, took me to the gym. We started training. The next day we would do it again. And for the entire week, we trained every morning with a small group of other fighters. And at the end of the week, he brought me into his office and he said, okay, Mary, I have a question for you. Okay. He's like, I want to know if you want to be a good boxer or if you want to be a champion. And I thought, like, that's an easy question. I want to be a champion. He's like, before you answer me, I want to explain something to you. If you want to be a good boxer, we can get along, we can have a lot of fun. I'll teach you how to throw some combinations and how to box, and you'll win some fights, and the kids at school will know not to mess with you. If that's what you want, we can do that, and it'll be fun. if you want to be a champion, you're going to hate my guts, because I'm going to push you when you don't think you can be pushed anymore. You think 5:30 is early? I'm going to make you get up at 5, and then 4:30. It's going to get harder and harder. You're going to come here in the morning on a bad day, and you're going to have someone punch you in the face, and it's not going to be enjoyable, Mary, but I'm going to make sure you become a champion if that's what you want to do, if that's what you want to be. And I thought about all the other sports that I played, all the other things that I had participated in where I didn't give 100% of an effort. And I thought, this is a really interesting opportunity that I have. This Olympic coach is offering me to be a champion. How could I turn that down? It sounded like a great deal. So I said, okay, I want to do whatever it takes to be a champion. He said, okay. He was not kidding about me hating his guts in the process. It was very difficult. And exactly like he said, on days when I didn't think I could be pushed anymore, he would throw me in the ring with somebody to spar. And that's basically simulated fighting. And it would be difficult. It would be very difficult. But in 2004, I won my first Canadian championship. It made it all worth it. And I had an incredible journey leading up to that. I never worked so hard at anything in my entire life. We were getting up early, training to fight, spending the rest of the day recovering, preparing, thinking up strategies, training again. It was really intense getting ready for this first national championship. At that time, women didn't box in the Olympics. Men boxed in the Olympics, and women were not allowed to participate. I didn't know what my goal was going to be in boxing, but I knew that I wanted to go to a world championship and become a carded athlete. A carded athlete means you get funded just to train at your sport, and a few other perks as well. But I wanted to become a carded athlete, and to be that, at that time, I had to get a medal at the World Championships. So my first World Championship was going to be in 2005, my second year on the national team. I'd have a chance to go to the Worlds and a chance to medal and become a carded athlete. And one of my coaches took me aside, and he said, Mary, I want to talk to you about attitude. I'm like, okay. This is coming from a man named Ted Farron, who has the best attitude of anyone I've ever met in my life. He said, Mary, it's important to have a good attitude when things don't go right. He said, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. That's how important your attitude is. And I didn't really know how I was going to use this information at the time when he gave it to me. But I listened and I heard him, and he was a living example of having a good attitude. So I just kind of put it away in my mind at that time. I was getting ready for the World Championship in 2005. It was going to be held in Russia. And I had been training the hardest I had ever trained in my life. I was prepared. I was on weight. I was in shape. I was ready to go. I was sharp. I had been doing a lot of work in the gym. And 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, I got a phone call. It was the executive director of Boxing Canada, and he said, I have some bad news for you. Okay, what's the bad news? He said, the World Championship is canceled. What do you mean it's canceled? How can it be canceled? He's like, well, it's just, for a number of reasons, it's canceled. And you'll have to wait 2 years for the next World Championship to have that opportunity to be a carded athlete. And in that moment, I felt frustrated, I felt angry, I felt a lot of negative things. And I remember what Ted said to me. And so I asked that executive director, I said, what are the chances that we will have an opportunity to compete this year? And he's like, no, Mary, there's no chance. I'm like, there has to be some kind of chance. Give me a number. And he said, okay, there's a 5% chance that you can still participate in the World Championships, and a 95% chance that it's done and you'll have to wait 2 years. I said, okay, I'll use that. I'll work with that 5%. And the next day I was back in the gym, and I was still training because I thought to myself, what if we do have this tournament still, and all of my opponents got the news that I just got and stopped training? I'll be in a better position to win this tournament. This could be a good thing. I tried to make a positive out of it. This could be a good thing, okay? So I'm back in the gym and I'm training, and 2 weeks later, I get a call from the executive director again. He said, Mary, I have good news and I have bad news. What do you want to hear first? Give me the good news. He said, okay, we're going to the World Championship. It's back on. Like, wow. What's the bad news? And he's like, the bad news is that we have to leave in 3 days. I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound like bad news. I'm ready to go, let's go. And he said, have you still been training? Are you still on weight? There's a lot of, should we put the money into sending you to this tournament if you're not ready? I know I gave you bad news a couple weeks ago. You probably stopped training. And I said, no, I didn't stop training. I'm ready to go. I'm more ready now than I was 2 weeks ago. Let's do this. At that time, we had 13 divisions on a team. So there was 13 women on the national team. We sent a team of 7 women that year because almost half of the team was not able to participate after we had that initial cancellation for different reasons, whether they weren't in shape anymore, they went on vacation, number of different reasons. But they weren't able to participate. We sent a smaller team. And that was the first year that I won a world championship. And not only won world championship, but was also named pound for pound the best boxer at that world championship. I would say it was by far the peak of my performances. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but it definitely was. I had my best performance at my very first world championship. And that lesson that I learned about keeping a good attitude when things looked terrible was so meaningful to me. And when I look back at my sport career, there were so many different lessons that I was able to learn through sport that I wouldn't have learned any other way. And that was one of them that was very important to me. After that, there was, I still spent about 6 years on the national team. In 2009, I got a call from the president of Boxing Ontario telling me that women would participate in the Olympics for the very first time. It was very exciting. I remember getting that phone call. I remember exactly how I felt. I remember where I was. It was very exciting. And she said, there's bad news too. I'm like, okay, what's the bad news? We're going to the Olympics, what's the bad news? She said, the bad news is that there's only going to be 3 weight divisions. Okay, so at the time I was fighting as a welterweight, 145 pounds. I'm like, okay, what divisions are going? She's like, 112. It's my leg. Like 132. I'm like, nope. And 165. So I made that jump up to 165 for a chance at going to the Olympic Games. And in 2012, I became the first woman from Canada to compete at the Olympics. All this was very meaningful to me. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot through sport. But it was what happened after that I want to talk to you guys the most about. So when I left sport, I went and lived up north on a reserve called Saskatchewan. And there it was my job to find activities for youth to keep them out of trouble, to keep them out of the courts. And I didn't want to be a boxer anymore. I'd been boxing for a long time. My identity was wrapped up in boxing. I wanted to leave my hometown, go to a community I've never been to before, and not be a boxer. So I thought, okay, I can go up there and do some basketball with these kids and in some type of sport. I think sport for me always helped me stay somewhat out of trouble. So I wanted to do the same thing. When I got up there, I realized there was no sport happening at all. And I had seen that in other communities as I traveled around, but it didn't really become that real to me until I lived there and saw firsthand. And I knew the experiences that I had with sport. I knew what it had done for my life. I knew what I had learned from sport and through sport. And I saw these kids that didn't have any access to sport. A lot of them didn't even have gym class. There were no basketball hoops in town for them to play pickup ball. There were no teams having scrimmages. There was nothing like that. There was no competitions happening in sport. And it really rocked me for a while there. I'd never really experienced that. And one of the communities that I went to briefly for that job was Big Trout Lake. It's the community where I had lived for a year as an infant. It was a beautiful community. And I asked my parents after that visit, I said, this place is beautiful. Why did we ever move? And my dad said, we wouldn't have moved. It's because your mom wanted to move. Okay, so, so then it occurred to me, there was a big possibility that I could have grown up in Big Trout Lake. And I started to think what my life would have been like had I grown up in Big Trout Lake. Had my dad gotten what he wanted and we stayed there and grew up there, would I have access to, no, I wouldn't have had any access to sport. I would never have put on a pair of boxing gloves. And it was hard to imagine that one little decision made such a big difference in my life. And that realization made me think deeper about the lack of participation in sport on reserves, the lack of accessibility to sport on reserves. So living in Saskatchewan, I really wanted to bring as much sport opportunity as I could to the kids for the short time that I was there. So we were doing basketball up until one or some of them figured out that I was a boxer, an Olympian, a 3-time world champion in Pan Am Games gold medalist boxer. And they came up to me one day and they said, why are you teaching us basketball? Why aren't you showing us boxing? And I'm like, okay, if you want to learn how to box, I can teach you how to box, but we'll do basketball after school, and anyone who wants to learn boxing can come at 7 a.m. before class starts, and I'll teach them boxing. I didn't think I was going to have many people show up, but I did. I had a nice group there of about 7 or 8 kids who would show up every day at 7 a.m. And one thing I'll never forget, and I told this story earlier today, but one thing I'll never forget is during a snowstorm, when it was minus 50 outside, it was a blizzard, I was waiting at the gym thinking, we're probably not going to have anyone today. Look at it out there. It's crazy out there. And everyone has to walk from their house to this gym. There's no way anyone is coming this morning. And then I looked out the window and I started seeing these dots getting closer. And I realized the kids were coming to the gym. They were walking from their homes in a snowstorm to go to this gym. That's how hungry they were for sport. Something that I took for granted my entire life. That's how hungry they were. I would have never walked in a snowstorm to a gym. I had an opportunity that was hard to pass up with an Olympic coach willing to train me and pick me up and bring me to the gym. I would never have walked through the snowstorm to get there, but these kids were showing that kind of resilience that is mind-blowing. And they made it there, and they reminded me just how powerful sport can be. So we started a boxing gym. And the kids got to learn the sport, compete with each other, and through the years they got to actually compete in boxing. And it's been a project that's gone on for a few years now, but as someone who has been involved with sport my whole life, I know that it's very important to have access to sport. I wish I could see you guys right now, because I want to ask, like, how many people in the audience have participated in any capacity in sport at all in their life? You might be raising your hands, but I can't see, so I'm going to need you to make some noise. No, sorry, that was corny. But no, most of us have. And who can agree that it was, I don't want to call it life-changing. It was life-changing for me. It's not life-changing for anybody. But if anyone else feels like it was life-changing for them, can you just clap or make some kind of... Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is so important to have access to sport. It is mind-blowing to people when they realize, because a lot of folks don't realize, and I surely didn't realize or understand, how many kids right here in Ontario living on reserves do not have any access to something that we all take for granted, something that can help your mental health, your physical well-being, your emotional well-being. You develop through sport, and so many kids do not even have access to this. That is something that it doesn't sit right with me as a lifelong athlete. It doesn't sit right with me, and I hope that it's something that you folks here will be able to think about also after this talk. I want to share something, and it's the Olympic Creed. When I was first read the Olympic Creed as an Olympian, I didn't like it. I thought it was really soft, actually. I was very competitive. I wanted to win the Olympics, and the Creed sounds like this. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part. Just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well. Participation in sport is necessary. It's vital for growth. I think often about what my life would be like if I didn't have access to sport. And I'm reminded about a year when I was in high school when extracurricular activities were cut off. There was no sports, no school clubs, nothing like that was happening. And it was an awful year, not just for me as someone who liked to participate, but there was a lot more suspensions. There was a lot more kids being kicked out of school, a lot more fights in school, a lot more kids who just decided not to show up to class. All of these things were compounding in just 1 year of not having access to sport. And I remember that and how devastating it felt at the time. And I couldn't even imagine what it would have been like if that was my life. Every year, year after year, no extracurricular activities, no coach making me run laps and shoot hoops and develop with my friends and learn and compete and all of these extra things that I was able to experience through sport. I couldn't imagine what things would have been like without that. I'm someone who, obviously going to the Olympics and becoming a professional athlete is not the goal for most people. It's not what most people get out of sport. But there's a lot of other things that we all do get out of sport just by participating. This feels better, actually, than just staying in one spot. This does feel better. So I want to wrap this up with just maybe doing a demo. I think Minnie said she wanted to do a boxing demo with me. Maybe. I'm just joking. I said I was going to put you on the spot, though. I am just kidding. I won't do that. But I will ask Dale to come back up, and I really want to engage with anybody here who has questions, who wants to share stories or ask questions. I would be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Just to hear about your journey a little more. I know we got to know each other a bit over lunch, but this was fantastic. Thank you. So to kick it off, and Mary had mentioned that she'd love to hear some questions from the audience, and I understand we also have an online audience, so I will check in a few minutes with Elizabeth, who is monitoring that, to see if there's any questions so that we can pass those along to you as well. But something that you mentioned about your experiences, particularly in some northern First Nations communities. What do you see as the major resources that are needed to make changes so that youth are able to have an opportunity to participate in sport?
That's a very good question. And it's a very difficult question also, and it's one that I have been thinking about for a number of years. I think that when I look around at my hometown, at who is encouraging sport participation, and they're coaches who have played sports when they were younger and understand how necessary it is to have access to sport. And I think that that's what's missing because folks haven't had access to sport. You don't have any adults who can be coaches and share what they learned when they were younger because they didn't have that opportunity. So I think what's missing right now are maybe just some community members that have that experience, whether they left the community to get it or can get it somehow while they're living there. I think that we're missing coaches who want to give back, and that's that's how sport grows in communities. So we're missing those coaches.
And not a quick fix at all.
Yeah.
Just to add to that and to ask a little bit more then, with some of the students that you were able, some of the youth that you've worked with, what are your favorite experiences with working with them? And do you have some that kind of stand out that maybe are in a position at some point to take on some of these roles in the communities that you worked with?
So did you ask who my favorites were? That's the part that maybe I just said that in my own head. But no, one of the young men at the gym, he started coming to the gym when he was in 7th grade, so that's about 12 years old. He's 20 now. And he was getting into fights a lot in school, and I don't want to share too much about somebody else's experience and stories, but we held a sharing circle for him to figure out what we could do for him. He had a tough upbringing, which resulted in nobody really knowing how to help him. And he wasn't giving us any clues. I'm not sure that he knew as a 12-year-old what could help him. So we all kind of put our heads together, and he was one of the first participants in the boxing club. And some folks thought, when you teach these kids who are already fighting, when you teach them how to do it properly, we're going to have more fights in the schoolyard. But that is not what happened. He stopped getting into trouble completely, and has focused a lot of energy into training. And right now he has 3 fights, and he is the most experienced boxer in the community. And I do have high hopes that he will be the community coach. Yeah.
All right, now that I've kind of broken the ice and kicked that off, I thought we could open it up to the audience, and Olivia is going to run around with the microphone.
So I have a little story to share. During the time that you were training for boxing, I was a student at the University of Windsor, and I was on the track team. And I remember you coming to the indoor track to train with your coach, and you did outdoors as well. And I remember my coaches saying, and Dennis Farrell saying, who you probably are aware of, that's Mary Spencer. She's amazing at boxing. When there's women in the Olympics for boxing, she's going to go. She's going to be awesome. And so from a very young age of my own athletic journey, I came to know you and follow your journey. And I've always been quite inspired by what you've done before and after. And when my husband found out that you were coming here, he's born and raised from Windsor, he was just probably more excited than I was, because you brought the attitude and the excitement in the community. You elevated it so much for a sport that often doesn't get recognition, and for people that don't always get the recognition that they deserve. And so I just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Funny story about Dennis Farrell. It's not really that funny, but I went up to him one day at the St. Denis Center, and I said, how fast do I have to run a 5K to be on your cross-country team? And I'm not even sure if he had anything to do with cross-country, because he was track, and I'm not sure if they're related, but in my head, it was related. So I asked him, and he looked at me, and he goes, stick to boxing.
Thank you so much for your time today. Recognizing that some of us are a little not on the athletic side, how would you recommend so of course showing up to their events, but how do supporters of youth and kids and folks in the athletic program support their student or their youth in getting where they want to go? So I know, like, showing up to their games if you can, but were there things that folks did for you outside of training that either motivated you to show up or recognized the work that you were doing and really propelled you forward? Did you find that was a lot of your own support that you were giving? Is there a way that someone can give that to you or to someone who's looking to engage further in athletics?
Great question, and let me just say that showing up to your students' games is huge. Mm-hmm. That is huge, and an experience that I had when I started boxing was when people started hearing that I started boxing, I would walk down the hallway of the school and teachers and coaches would kind of make fun of me for boxing in a way, you know, and it's kind of surprising to think about it, but any kind of positive interaction that you have with your students regarding their sport is going to be something they remember. I had one teacher at my high school who cared that I was boxing, encouraged it, wanted to know if I made practice that day, and I know him still to this day. He made a huge impact on my life just because he cared and just because he didn't try to put me down for doing it. Being a woman boxing, I started boxing in 2002, so women didn't really box at that time, you know, and, or not many, I should say, because I did, but not many women boxed at that time. It was unfamiliar to most folks. So having that one teacher that was just not putting me down for it made a huge difference. So you might think you need to do more than show up to the games, but believe me, your students will remember that.
Thank you.
Hi, this might be more of a rant, similar to Jennifer, just kind of, sitting here and just, you know, thinking about a lot of what you said in terms of, I mean, this stands out to me the most is just, I think we all forget how important it is to move our bodies and the benefits that can come from moving your body. I have 3 boys, and I think often boys get maybe misdiagnosed or misunderstood when it comes to physical activity and like boredom in the classroom or in environments that don't necessarily encourage or foster movement, I guess, if you will. You know, like even myself, like you know, you're feeling anxious. I've struggled with anxiety like on and off throughout my life, more so after children for sure. More stress and responsibility equals more anxiety, but simple things like just even going outside and taking a walk and feeling the fresh air on your face, like what a difference that really makes. And especially in an environment like, an institution that doesn't necessarily naturally foster movement. I think that's something that's really important for educators, professors, staff, faculty, whoever you are. It's, figuring out how you can incorporate movement into your practice and really instilling the benefits of physical activity in any form, right? Like whether that's taking a lesson outside or giving your students a break throughout a long lecture to make sure that they're moving their body. And I just think that a lot of the time we really underestimate how much sitting at a desk can really just limit your creativity. It's so important to move your body, and just you kind of like reinstilled that sitting here and listening to you. I've kind of realized that as I've gotten older, for sure. Sports are not something that is a part of my life necessarily. I was really into dance when I was younger, but kind of bringing it back to that community piece as well, because I'm from Six Nations, which is heavily lacrosse influenced, right? So kids that don't necessarily like playing lacrosse, I like that you were saying something about how you had that one coach that believed in you, or that one person that was a mentor for you. Because I think sometimes that can happen too, where, you're not necessarily into lacrosse, so you get made fun of, or, it's not necessarily the norm. So I guess a question for you would be, what would you say to an Indigenous youth that is maybe considering like a non-conventional career path? And what do you wish somebody told you when you were younger to inspire you to keep pushing towards your goal?
This is not going to be sound so great, but the first time I told somebody that I wanted to box, it was actually my dad. And I told him when I was about 11 years old. And what he said to me was, boxing is not for girls. And he shut the door on me boxing completely at that age, and I was really relying on my parents to take me to a sporting club or whatever at that age. And he shut the door on it, and I knew in my mind that it wasn't true. And thankfully I knew that. The reason I knew it is because I fought some boys at school every day, and trust me, boxing is for girls.
I can fight.
So I knew my dad was wrong. I couldn't tell him why I knew, but I knew he was wrong. A lot of people don't have that. They might get persuaded not to go after something that's unconventional and not understand that they can do it anyways. It was certainly unconventional as a woman to be boxing. Now it's a little more mainstream, but at the time I had to wait until I was an age where I was basically doing whatever I wanted to, and I was following what I wanted to do, and things worked out for me. I think that it's an exciting thing to make a path where one wasn't before. I think that is, there's a lot of fun in that, there's a lot of joy in that, and I would want to encourage someone to take a road less traveled, just because it's what I did. I thought it was great. I don't know how I would encourage them, but because that was your question, right? How would I encourage them?
Yeah, what would you say to someone that's considering a non-conventional career path?
I guess just being encouraging, just some words of encouragement can go a long way, because when it's non-conventional, there are plenty of people, and you might not hear them, but the person who is trying to take that path definitely hears a lot of people telling him it's a bad idea, don't do that, it's stupid, or not paying any attention at all. So any kind of positive reinforcement would go a very long way with somebody who's trying to do something unconventional. Not just pointing to the fact that girls don't do that, but trying to maybe, like in my situation, but looking at ways for, well, how can girls do that? There's a boxer in the world named Katie Taylor. She's from Ireland. And I think back to my experiences with my dad telling him that I want to box, and it was kind of, the door was closed. Luckily, that was only temporary, but the door was closed. Katie Taylor's dad was a boxing coach, and she has done phenomenal things for women in the world. But you know what? She had a dad who dressed her up like a boy so she could go and get fights as a young girl. And anyways, so I'm just showing the two different routes that you can take, really, when someone is telling you can't do it versus someone who's telling you that you can do it, and just offering some positive reinforcement or a little bit of encouragement will go a very long way with somebody who is thinking about a non-traditional career path.
Thank you. And thank you for the reminder that we have access to just so many services too. That was a really great reminder because like really now I'm like, Catherine, you have no excuse to not go and do something physically. I have no excuse to not go to the gym because look at all the amazing supports and services that we have in Waterloo region, and we're very fortunate to have access to that. So thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, thanks. So the question is, thank you for an amazing and inspirational talk. Could you tell us a bit about what you say to yourself that helps you keep going when things are feeling really challenging?
Sorry, what I say to myself?
Yes.
When things are challenging? Well, earlier I shared the story that that a mentor of mine had instilled this way of thinking in me, that life's 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. So when things get difficult, that is absolutely what I think about first. How am I responding to this, and how should I be responding to this? How could I respond better if I want a better outcome? And sometimes you don't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. I could have been training for a world championship that never did happen. That's the truth. But trying to just stay positive, I think, in difficult situations, because when there is a payoff, it feels like it's pretty magical. So it's worth it. And that's what I try and keep in mind.
Hello, thank you. I was a person who went to a very small high school, and so I was able to participate in sport, not because I excelled at it, but because it was less of a tryout and more of a show up if you want to be on the team kind of thing. But I also really benefited from those experiences. I'm really glad I got to participate in those things. But I was never going to be the person that was going to pursue it later on in life or was going to be an Olympian or anything like that. And so I'm wondering if you have some advice on how to engage the people who don't want to be a champion, who just want to be good or have some fun or things like that. How do we incorporate more youth into things and not just the ones who have those aspirations of the NHL or the Olympics or whatever that looks like?
That's a great question, and we were talking about that a little bit earlier, because not everybody is going to be an Olympian or a professional athlete, but everyone can still benefit from sport, and they can still experience all of the benefits and the joys of participating. And I think that when it comes down to like at a coaching level, I think coaches can make it more enjoyable and more fun. But I think that just a reminder to folks that at the pinnacle of sport, the Olympics, the Olympic creed tells us that participating is the most important. I couldn't believe that when I was getting ready to go to the Olympics and everyone was, talking about winning and what's going to happen if you win and how are you going to win and what's it going to look like. And I couldn't believe it when I heard the Olympic creed the first time, and it's like, winning is not the point here? Even for Olympians, winning is not the point? This is not a house league. This is not house league, but they're still saying participation is key. And I think that just reminding folks about that is important. But coaches can do that, and sport organizers can do that and make it fun and make it enjoyable so that everybody can benefit from it. That's a great question.
So I have another question then. So just talking about the participation and how sometimes that can be a real challenge, especially on some reserves, especially the northern ones where you've done so much great work. Looking at Truth and Reconciliation, there are several calls to action that talk about sports specifically because of how important that is, right, to youth and adults as well. So what does, as an athlete and a role model, then what does reconciliation and resurgence look like to you in the sports world? And what kind of changes or commitments would you like to see that could make a really meaningful difference, particularly for youth?
That's a very good question. And it's a very long question. No, that's okay. I don't mind that it's long, but I might forget the first part. Yeah, I might forget the first part. So okay.
Just, I think we can see how important it is by the fact that there's 5 or 6 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation around sport. And so it's very important. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective and with some of the experiences you've had, what kinds of changes or commitments would you like to see that could make the most difference in the lives of some youth who are maybe missing out on that opportunity for sport right now?
Okay, that's great. So I have read over the sport-related calls to action, numbers 87 to 91, and I think they're a little bit soft because they are, they're doable though. I say soft, but I mean like they're calls to action that they're doable. Let's get this done. I think it's great that they included calls to action regarding specifically sport, but I think that more needs to be done than just fulfilling those calls to action. A lot more needs to be done, especially when we talk about First Nations that don't have any sport, and that's not really mentioned in the calls to action. They don't even touch on that. But that is what I find to be the most shocking, is not having any access at all. I find it to be shocking, and I think that more than just answering those calls to action, we need as many people who care about sport and who care about Indigenous communities to bring that together and do a lot of groundwork, really, and getting sports started and happening. Because, like we were mentioning earlier, we need people to be coaches in these communities, and they're going to be coaches when they have that experience as a young person, and that's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of groundwork that is going to be, I think, probably a lot more work than what the calls to action are asking. I think they're excellent calls to action. I don't mean to say that they're no good. They're excellent, but I think that a lot more groundwork actually has to happen right in communities that are specific to engaging youth in sport.
Again, not a quick fix, something that's going to take time and commitment. Are there any other questions online, Elizabeth? Oh, or there's one. Oh, okay.
I was thinking about what you were saying about coaches too, because a story that's somewhat unrelated. My sister and I were, she's really involved in our local community skating club. But an issue that we were talking about and that we're seeing is that just a lack of volunteers, really. So we were kind of, talking about, oh, like, remember when we did this when we were younger? It just seemed like there was so much more support and there were so many more parents involved. But a huge barrier that I'm seeing is what I said to my sister. I was like, well, when you think about it, all those women that were helping to facilitate that were stay-at-home moms. And now, like, that's just not really doable for most families to have a parent that is home full-time. So I'm loving what you're saying about the coaching aspect, because I agree that that is a huge piece. So as a coach yourself, what are supports that communities could encourage or provide to get more community members to go into coaching, or to, like, what type of supports do you think would be beneficial for community members that are considering going into coaching? I don't know if that's a long-winded question, but is there anything that you're seeing that could, like, really help just encourage more parents or individuals within community to consider coaching as an option?
That's a good question. It's a question that I can't answer on the spot. It's one that I'm thinking about. I'm trying to find the answer to, and I'm maybe one day I'll be back with some answers. But that is a very good question, and if you get the answer before I do, call me, because I would like to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, that's a good observation on your part, that there were more volunteers because people had more time to do it. So how do you, and volunteers are huge for sport. They're vital to sport. And where do we find them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
you're. You let me know
curious.
if you figure it out.
Yeah, it just makes me think about the fact, you know, you can have the nicest facility, you can have the nicest equipment, you can have, you know, lots of sponsorship, but if you don't actually have the people to administer the training or what have you, it's a problem that I'm seeing across the board with funding and things like that. So I appreciate it. I agree. There's no current solution. So.
Yeah, you're right, and it's not one that, like, money can fix. You know, like, you can get a grant for facilities or for equipment, all this stuff, but how do you get the people to run the programs? Because that's the most important. How do you get the people? And I think that how you get them is to have enough young people participate, so then they can understand how important it was and want to share it when they get older. I think that might be the way to do it. I'm not sure though, and but it is something that needs to be figured out and thought about and worked towards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, we chatted over lunch, but I had this burning question that I wanted to know. What is your favorite post-fight cheat meal? And weight, after you make weight, what is your favorite meal?
I don't want to say. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, honestly, do you mean after I make weight or after I compete? Because after I make weight, I'm still competing, right? I still have to keep the good energy for the competition the next day. So do you mean post-weigh-in or post-fight?
Post-fight.
Okay, well, I live in Montreal, so post-fight is a poutine. It's a poutine for sure. Yeah, and after the weigh-in, but before the fight, there's absolutely no way I'd be able to look at a poutine. But that's definitely what I go for when it's all done. When the work's all done, that's what I'm gearing for. And I mean just a regular one, like the original, okay? Don't add the hot dogs in there or anything like that. Just the original, the right way.
Have you noticed any differences regionally where there's more access to sport in certain communities or reserves? So in northern communities where you've been, it was very evident that there wasn't access to sport. Have you noticed regions or pockets either within Ontario or Canada, depending on where you've traveled, where there is a lot more support for sport and you're seeing the successes of the grassroots of the programming?
Yes, certainly I see more in this area, or, any of the communities that are close to the GTA certainly have a lot more access to participate. What makes it very difficult in a fly-in community is even if the schools were to have a sport team, so if a teacher or whoever, a community member, decided to be volleyball coach and start a volleyball team, they wouldn't be able to go and compete against other teams unless they had funding that would include flying a team to another community. And it is very expensive to do that, not just because flying is expensive, but because flying in the north is incredibly expensive. I'm not sure how many folks here are familiar with trying to fly in the north, but I'll just say that flying from Timmins to Saskatchewan, a round-trip flight would be about $1,200. And that's just getting from Timmins to Saskatchewan for one person. So that, I think, stands in the way of the fly-in communities from really being able to develop sport, is having someone to compete against, because a lot of times that's the fun part about sport too, we learn through competing and whatnot. So it's important to have that. But communities that don't have that barrier certainly have better access. But there's always going to be, like in my own community, it's not a fly-in community, it's outside of Wyerton. There are more, there's more sport participation there, just because you can drive to a nearby town and participate, but there's a lot of kids that don't have anyone who can drive them. And the kids who are going to school in the town, so one of the nearby towns that has a high school is Owen Sound, and the kids that go to Owen Sound for school actually can't play on the sport teams because the bus that brings them back to the reserve needs to leave at a certain time, and there's no room left for anyone who'd like to participate in extracurricular activities. So just the fact of them needing a ride back to the reserve excludes them. But there are some ways around that. If you have somebody who could drive you, you can get around that. But I mean, that's a big deal, having someone who can drive you. And I certainly didn't have that as a young person. If a gym or a community space wasn't on the bus route, I couldn't go. Up until I started boxing, and my coach actually came and picked me up from my house every day and removed a huge barrier. But that barrier still exists on reserves that are close to cities with community centers and gyms and access to sport. So yeah, there are some areas where there's certainly a lot more participation, but could still use a lot of improvement, I'd say.
Oh, wow. A little more of a comment, but I wanted to thank you, because I know that growing up for a lot, like you mentioned, like a lot of women don't see themselves as professional athletes because it didn't exist for a long time. And I think it's just really cool to see how much that's evolving. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story, because I think it inspires a lot of people to, especially young girls, to know that that's a possibility for them, that it exists, and that if you work really hard and you push hard, the results come through. So as someone who grew up a woman athlete and not having the opportunity to potentially do an unconventional sport at a professional level, I think it's really awesome. So thanks. So I guess more how does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? If there's a question component.
The question part is, what does it mean to me? Which part? What does which part mean to me?
Oh, just seeing the evolution of women in sport.
Oh. Seeing the evolution of women's sport has been absolutely incredible to witness. And like I mentioned earlier, that when I was 11, that's when I wanted to box. My dad actually took my brother to a boxing gym, and my brother didn't want to box. My dad kind of forced him to box, and my brother didn't want to do it. And his first day in the gym, he got busted in the nose, and he's like, I'm not going back. One and done, that's it. And I was like, wait a minute, where did you guys go? Boxing club? I'm like, I'll go to the boxing club. And I could tell that my dad really wanted my brother to go. And he was a little bit upset that my brother didn't want to go back. And so I was like, hello, I'll go. And then he's like, no, it's not for girls. And I'm like, I'll fight the guy that gave him a bloody nose. I'll fight him. And thinking that, he might change his mind. And he's just like, no, it's... And so for me, going from that to fast forward to about 2013, or maybe it was just the second half of 2012, I had gotten back from the Olympics. And I walked into my home gym, the Windsor Amateur Boxing Club, and the first thing that caught my eye was there were 2 dads there with their little 10-year-old daughters. And they had brought them to the gym to learn how to box. And then those 2 girls, they get in the ring and they're fighting. I could not believe what I was seeing. And I realized, it's been hard. It's been a struggle for sure, but we've made progress. And that was a visual representation right there in my gym of the progress that has been made. And it's very encouraging, of course. When stuff's difficult and you get a lot of pushback for something, it's really encouraging to see change. And we're going to see more of it. That's for sure. I think especially in the world of women's boxing, we're going to see a lot more of those changes. We already are seeing a lot more of those changes. But one thing that I also thought about, I'm currently a professional boxer, and there's a little bit of not a war, but like a little battle about if we should be fighting 3 minutes like the men or 2 minutes like they have women fighting right now. And I think often about, because during this discussion, we're hearing a lot of people voice why women shouldn't do the same as men and why we should be doing things differently. And I think back to a time where I was doing these workouts with an older woman. I was doing some core workouts with her. She's my training partner. And one day she told me, she's like, Mary, what you're going through right now, I went through as a runner when I was your age. Like, what do you mean? I was a runner. Like, running wasn't for girls? What do you mean? And she's like, Mary, running the 400 meters and the 800 meters was banned for women when I was a young runner. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, what were people saying about that? And she said, we had people who were saying, and not just randoms, but doctors who were saying women would lose their uterus on the track if they tried to do a run as difficult as a 400-meter race. I mean, hey, the 400 meters is hard. Okay, I know we got the track athlete right here. Were you a 400-meter runner? No way. That is brutal, right? It is difficult, right? But did your uterus ever fall out? Thank God. Like, that is something that, even though it was a crazy story that she shared with me, but it was encouraging at the same time, because just to see how far we've come from that way of thinking. Now I'm hearing what I consider to be crazy ways of thinking regarding boxing, and all I could think of is, hopefully, when I'm older, I can have a chat the way this woman had a chat with me and explain to another young girl what I had to go through as a boxer, and what people said we couldn't do, and what people, how people tried to keep us out of that ring. So I go off when I'm answering questions, but hopefully I got it answered somewhere in there. But yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, good.
I just want to add to that quickly, because I've done a lot of work with masters athletes, and that I have heard that before from some of the people that I've interviewed in their 70s and 80s now, not being able to participate and not having that encouragement, but also being told crazy things like that as to why not. And it's funny because a lot of them now are able to do it in their 60s, 70s, and 80s because they couldn't do it when they were younger. But good on them for coming and trying to do that now. So I think we're getting close to being out of time. So I just want to say, at lunch you mentioned something to me, and you said when you have a gift, like you do, the biggest joy is to be able to share it with others. And I think you've really effectively done that today, not just in the examples that you explained and how much you're helping, especially young women and young girls as athletes, but also in sharing your stories with us. I think that's so impactful, and thank you, Miigwech, for being here and doing that. So I will pass it along now to Olivia to close this.
Hi everyone. So that's the end of the event. We're just going to have someone bring up a gift. So I just wanted to wrap it up by saying a huge thank you to Mary and Dale, and thank you to all of you for your lovely questions and showing up today.